Colonel Marvin Spear had sold the house, the orchard tools, and 400 bushel crates by 3 o'clock. And the last lot on his bill sheet was the one thing on the place that nobody in the crowd could put a name to. It stood at the bottom of the yard in a low building with a sagging roof, a tower of white oak staves 12 feet tall and 8 feet across, bound with 6 flat iron hoops the color of a rusted plow, stained black from the base to the shoulder. The bill sheet said, Lot 118, one wood tank in vinegar house, as it stands. Spear walked better than 300 people down the yard to sell it, and it took him 9 minutes to find a bidder. Harlan Dietz bought it for $30, and before the auctioneer had the word sold all the way out. The laughing had started behind him. It was the 11th of October, 1958, on the Rensselaer Place, a mile north of Sherrod, Michigan, in Ordway County. Apple country, gravel roads running between rows of Northern Spy and Baldwin, a packing shed at the rail siding, a cider press in half the barns in the township, and the smell of windfalls going soft in the grass every October from one end of the county to the other. August Rensselaer had been buried in July at 84 years of age. He was the last of his family, and the nearest heir was a cousin in Saginaw who wanted the whole thing settled in a single Saturday. So the cousin hired Spear, and Spear sold all of it: the tractor, the sprayer, the ladders, the grading table, the crates, the parlor furniture, 200 jars of canning out of the cellar, and then, because it was standing on Rensselaer ground and named on the inventory, the tank. The building it stood in had been the Rensselaer Cider and Vinegar Works. It had made vinegar for the grocery trade from 1904 until the autumn of 1946, when Gus shut the doors, sold his wholesale accounts to a company in Ohio, and went back to selling apples like everybody else. Anybody who climbed the ladder and looked in the top of that tank saw the same thing, and it was not treasure. It was shavings. The tower was packed to within a foot of its rim with curled beechwood shavings, dry, gray-brown, dusty, close to 3 tons of them. That is what a vinegar generator is. There is a false bottom of oak slats a foot above the floor of the tank, and the whole space above it is filled with beech shavings. A trough on top drilled with small holes. Spreads hard cider over the packing so it trickles down through it slowly. A ring of air holes bored through the staves at the bottom lets the air in, and the warmth of the process draws the air up through the shavings the way a chimney draws. The cider goes in sweet sharp at the top and comes out of a spigot at the base as vinegar. There is no motor on it. No gear, no crank, no lock, no moving part anywhere in it, and nothing inside it worth carrying away. It is not a machine, and it is not a strongbox. It is a house built for something to live in, and every one of the 300 people standing in that yard had forgotten what. Cleve Rundle had not forgotten. He simply did not care. Rundle was 47, a salvage and used equipment dealer out of Calkin, heavy through the shoulders, mustard-tanned sport coat, bolo tie, and a voice that carried to the road. Spear asked him for a bid to start it, the way an auctioneer does when he wants a thing to look wanted, and Rundle gave the crowd its verdict instead. "There's $4 of hoop iron on that thing, Marvin," he said. "It'll cost a man $60 to get it off. Throw in the spigot, and we'll call it square, the yard like that." And the arithmetic was not wrong. Wooden tanks were finished by 1958. A sound stave tank had some value to a cider man, but this one was black to the shoulder with 42 years of acid, packed solid with rubbish, and it stank at 20 feet. A dairy equipment dealer looked in the top of it and walked away. A junkman from Bell City did not bother to climb the ladder. Then Harlan Dietz said, $30. Harlan was 52. He grew 60 acres of Spy and Baldwin on the ridge east of Sherrod, wore faded blue bib overalls and a straw hat gone the color of a feed sack, and had never in his life bought anything at a sale that anybody envied. Spear said, sold fast, before the man could think better of it, and the yard came apart laughing. He was not buying a tank. He was buying 4,500 gallons standing up. If you've made it this far into Harlan's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. 60 acres of apples in 1958 meant spraying 8 or 9 times between April and August, and his sprayer held 300 gallons and drank it in 40 minutes. The creek was at the bottom of the hill, and the orchard was at the top. Every spray day started with a barrel wagon and a tractor going down for water and grinding back up with it, over and over. And it cost him better than 2 hours a day of a man and a machine doing nothing but carrying water uphill. Set a tank at the top of the ridge, fill it once, and the sprayer fills itself by gravity in 4 minutes. He had priced a galvanized steel tank that size out of the catalog. It was $500. In a good year, he cleared about 3 times that. So he paid his $30 at the clerk's table, took his ticket, and walked back up the yard past a parked car with the door standing open. An old woman was sitting sideways in the seat with a blanket over her knees, watching the crowd. Hattie Rensselaer Boyer, 79 years old, Gus's sister, born in the house behind her. She said, "You bought the best of it, mister. The tank was never the works." The works was in the shavings. He said, "Yes, ma'am, because you do," and he thought she was confused, and he put it out of his mind for 14 months. Verna heard about the purchase at supper, the way she heard most things, which is to say, afterwards. She was 50. She kept the spray records and the bank book in the same drawer, and she asked 2 questions. How are you going to get it out of that building? Take out the wall, he said. And what is in it? Shavings, he said. About 3 tons of them. She said that so far he had bought $30 of tank and 1 wall. The estate wanted the buildings emptied by the 1st of December, which gave him 7 weeks, and the first 3 of them taught him what 3 tons of packing actually means. He could not skid the tank loaded, and he could not get it through the doorway anyway, which was 6 feet wide against a tank 8 feet through. So he started at the top. He took the head off, set a ladder inside against the staves, and went down into it with a scoop shovel and a bushel basket on a rope. It took him 9 days. 41 wheelbarrow loads a day, out through the doorway and around behind the barn. The shavings themselves were light, and that was the only kindness in the job. They were 12 years dusty on top, damp and packed and matted at the bottom, and every handful of them carried the smell. The smell is the part the township still remembers. Vinegar out of a bottle is a kitchen smell. 3 tons of beech shavings out of a generator that ran for 42 years is not that. It goes up your nose and takes the back of your throat and sits in your clothes and your hair and the cab of your truck. Verna made him undress on the porch for 9 nights running. In November, in Michigan. He wheeled all of it out behind the barn and heaped it into a pile as high as a hay wagon. And he meant to burn it as soon as the weather turned wet enough to be safe about it. The weather stayed dry. The pile stayed where it was. Then he took the wall out of the vinegar house, ran 2 chains around the tank, and skidded it a mile up the ridge on a stone boat behind a borrowed crawler tractor at a walking pace with a neighbor driving alongside to tell him it was going to roll. It did not roll. He built a timber stand for it through the winter, set it 8 feet in the air so it would feed the sprayer by gravity, reheaded it, and in March he ran a hose from the creek pump and filled it. For 3 days it wept water from every seam, and Verna said what she had been thinking since October. On the 4th day the oak took up and swelled, and it held, tight as a drum, 500 gallons at the top of his own hill. For about a week, Harlan Dietz had the best water arrangement in the township, and it had cost him $30 and 1 wad. By the 6th day, the water in it was sour. By the 10th, you could smell it standing in the lane. By the middle of the 2nd week, there was a skin on the surface, a soft gray jelly floating flat, like a pancake of wet leather, thickening every day. Harlan had been around cider all his life. He knew exactly what a mother was. He had simply never expected to grow one in his spray water. Then it started costing him money. He mixed his first load of the season out of that tank in April, and the mix broke in the sprayer tank. The lime went to curd. The whole 300 gallons had to be dumped in the fencerow. And a half day of good spraying weather went with it. Worse, the acid went after the sprayer itself. Inside a month, the brass seat in the relief valve was pitted through, and the galvanizing on the fittings had gone dull and begun to shed. The valve cost him $11 and a trip to Calkin. He drained the tank, scrubbed it out with lye and a corn broom, rinsed it twice, and filled it again. In 8 days, the water was sour again. There was nothing left to clean. The acid was 42 years into the oak, and so was everything else. The tank was not broken. The tank was doing exactly what it had been built to do, patiently and continuously, and there was no way on earth to make it stop. That was the summer of 1959, and that was the summer the county enjoyed itself. At the elevator, it was Dietz's pickle barrel. At the church supper, a man asked Verna whether they were putting up the whole orchard in brine. And Cleve Rundle drove out one afternoon in June, the way a man drives out to look at a wreck, stood in the orchard with his hands in his pockets, looked up at 12 feet of oak on a timber stand, and repeated his offer of $4 for the hoops. This time he meant it as a kindness, and both of them knew it. Harlan hauled water in the barrel wagon that whole season, the same as he always had, 2 hours a day. He had a 4,500-gallon rain barrel on a stand at the top of his ridge and a pile of shavings behind his barn he still had not got around to burning. In December, he had cider he could not sell. He pressed his own drops every fall, sold what the roadside trade would take. And 6 50-gallon barrels of it had gone hard in the cellar and were sitting there being nobody's asset. Farm practice for that is old and simple. Lay a cloth over the bung and leave it alone for a year, and it will turn to vinegar by itself, weak and cloudy, 3 or 4%, good enough for pickles and cheap enough to be worth the wait. On the 5th of December, he walked out to the pile behind the barn to see whether it was dry enough down in the middle to take a match, because he wanted it gone before spring. The crust of it was frozen 2 inches down. Under the crust, it was not frozen at all. He pushed his arm into the middle of the heap up to the wrist, and the shavings in there were warm, not sun-warm. Warm the way the inside of a stack of green hay is warm, which is to say warm because something in it is working. A pile of dry wood shavings in a Michigan December does not make its own heat, not unless it is not dry, and not unless it is not just wood. He stood in the snow with his sleeve full of the smell, and he remembered a sentence that an old woman had said to him in a car in October of the year before. He carried 2 scoop shovels of those shavings down to the cellar and dumped them into one of the 6 barrels of hard cider, laid the cloth back over the bung, and did not think about it again. 6 weeks later, the last week of January, Verna sent him down for a jar of pickles. He lifted the cloth off that barrel out of pure curiosity, and what came up out of it moved him back a full step. He drew off a cupful and held it to the window. It was vinegar, not next year's project, not weak and not cloudy. It was clear, it was hard, and it took the top off his tongue. 6 weeks. In a cellar that had run between 48 and 52 degrees all winter, on cider that had finished strong, spy apples pressed sweet, and fermented cold will come in near 11%. And every book on farm vinegar he had ever seen said the same 2 things. The process crawls below 60 degrees and stops below 55. And the organism that makes vinegar gives up somewhere around 8% alcohol and leaves the rest of the job undone. He did what a careful man does. On the 2nd of February, he started 2 more barrels the same day, one with 2 scoops out of the pile and one with nothing. By the middle of March, the seeded barrel was finished vinegar. The other one was still cider in April and still cider in June. Del Hoyer, the county agricultural agent, came out in March with a bottle rack and a titration set in the back of a green sedan and ran the seeded barrel twice because he did not believe the first number. It was 6.2% acetic acid. Vinegar off a grocery shelf is 5. Hoyer put his glassware back in the case and said, "Harlan, this is not a farm barrel. This is a plant." He wrote that week to the State Agricultural College, 90 miles south. Dr. Roland Pesky drove up on the first Tuesday in May. He was 44, a fermentation bacteriologist, and he arrived with a wooden rack of screw-top jars and a spoon, and spent an afternoon filling them from the barrel, from 3 depths in the pile behind the barn, and from 4 places scraped off the inside of the tank staves. He explained, standing in the orchard, what Harlan actually had. A mother is not a substance, and it is not a recipe. It is a colony, a tough skin of living cellulose with a bacterium living inside it that takes in alcohol and puts out acid, and a wild yeast keeping it company and keeping it fed. A vinegar works does not own a formula. It owns a population. You cannot buy one from a catalogue, and you cannot make one from a book. You are given one, or you grow it from one you were given, and if it goes. It is gone. His letter came in July, 4 pages of it. The culture out of that pile was a partnership of 2 organisms, and it was not in any collection anywhere in the country. It worked steadily at 52 degrees, where the college's own reference strain and both of the commercial strains on his shelf sat and did nothing. It finished cider at 11%, where the commercial strains quit early and left a sweet, spoiled, useless barrel behind. Commercial generators are held at 85 degrees for a reason, Pesky wrote, and this thing does not need the reason. He asked permission to deposit a master in the college collection, and he catalogued it under the name of the township, the Sherrod strain, out of a works that started in 1904. While that letter was being typed 190 miles south of Sherrod, a company was in the worst trouble of its 60 years. Hollandale Foods ran a vinegar plant on the west side of Toledo in an old brick building on the river, 5 big wooden generators in an unheated hall. In 1946, Hollandale had bought August Rensler's wholesale accounts. And along with the accounts, they had taken 6 barrels of Rensler seed and built their whole house around it. They had run on the descendants of that culture for 14 years without ever heating the building, because they had never once needed to. In February of 1960, 3 of the 5 generators stopped making acid inside a fortnight. Then the 4th. They dumped 11,000 gallons, steam cleaned the packing, and reseeded from the 5th, and the 5th went off too. Whatever came through that plant, and Pesky's guess in his letter, was a virus of bacteria which does exactly this and leaves no trace anybody could see in 1960, it took the house culture with it. Hollandale could buy commercial seed by the barrel. Anybody could. But commercial seed soaks below 70 degrees, and their generators stood in a brick hall with no heat in it. And heating that building and holding it warm through an Ohio winter was a rebuild they had costed at a number Chesterfall would not say out loud in a farmhouse kitchen. They spent the spring trying. Their own contract customers began to notice that the vinegar had gone thin and flat, and one of them canceled. In September, Del Hoyer's write-up of a farm barrel in Ordway County reached the desk of a chemist named Gerald Metz. They came up on a Tuesday, the 20th of September, 1960, Fall, the plant superintendent, 46, and in a hurry. Metz, the chemist, 51, who said almost nothing all afternoon. They tasted the barrel. Metz ran his own titration on the kitchen table, tasted it again, and wrote one line in a notebook. Then they walked out to the pile behind the barn, and Fall put his arm into it up to the elbow and stood there a moment with his hand in the shavings. Then he made his offer, which was $150 for the tank, the shavings, and the barrel, hauled away. Harlan Dietz very nearly took it. That was 5 times his money on a thing the whole county had spent a year laughing at, and it would have got the pile off his place before spring. Verna asked the question from the doorway. If it is worth $150, she said, why did 2 men drive 190 miles to tell you so? Fall said they would leave the offer open a week and drove home. Harlan telephoned Pesky that night, reversed the charges, and asked him straight out what the thing was worth. Pesky would not give him a number. He gave him something better. He said, they built their plant around this organism, they have been running on it since 1946, and they have lost it. You have the only known culture of it in existence. And there is a master in my cabinet that came from your barn. Ask that man what 1 week of an idle plant costs his company. Then decide what a barrel is worth. The agreement was written out on the kitchen table in October of 1960 and typed up in Toledo afterwards, and the important thing about it is what it did not sell. It did not sell the tank. Hollandale bought live seed by the barrel, $200 for every 50-gallon barrel of working mother, grown in Harlan's own generator on Harlan's own cider, delivered to the plant on their call. The college kept its master. Harlan kept the tower. He took it down off the stand and set it on a sill in the corner of the machine shed, packed it with 3 tons of fresh beech shavings out of a mill at Bell City, seeded the packing from the pile behind the barn, hung the trough back over the top, and started running cider through it. In November of 1960, for the first time since 1946, there was a working vinegar generator in Ordway County. He shipped 31 barrels in 14 months. At $200 a barrel, that is $6,200, better than 3 years of what the orchard cleared, from a lot that Colonel Spear could not get a bid on in 9 minutes of trying. With the second check, he bought the galvanized steel tank out of the catalog for $500, set it on the timber stand at the top of the ridge, and finally got his gravity water. It only ever cost him 1 wall and $30 to find out he could afford it. In the spring of 1961, he drove out to a house in Sherrod and told Hattie Rensler Boy what had happened, and she was 82 by then and not surprised in the least. She said she had told him where it was. Cleve Rundle never did get the hoops. Here is the part worth keeping. Everything else Colonel Marvin Spears sold that Saturday was sold once and finished. The tractor was somebody's tractor. The crates were somebody's crates. The one lot on his bill sheet that nobody could name, that no dealer would carry away, that was priced in front of 300 people at $4 of scrap hoop and a spigot, was the only thing on the place that could be sold again the next year, and the year after that, and every year that anyone cared to keep it fed, because the shavings were not rubbish and the tank was not the point. The tank was a barn, and the thing living in it had been alive since 1904 and did not care that the doors had been shut for 12 years. It survived the works closing. It survived a man shoveling it into a wheelbarrow. It survived a Michigan winter in an open heap behind a barn, working away in the middle of the pile, making its own small heat under 2 inches of frozen crust, waiting for somebody to bring it something to eat. Harlan Dietz bought all of that for $30 because he wanted somewhere to put water, and because nobody else in the yard could see anything but a rotten wooden tank full of trash.